Flight attendant kicks black girl's bag. 10 minutes later, her mom buys the airline. They never saw it coming, especially not the flight attendant, who thought she could get away with manhandling a little girl's bag. In the bustling corridors of John F. Kennedy International Airport, an unassuming family was moments away from changing aviation history. When a young black girl's carry-on was shoved and kicked aside, it wasn't just her personal belongings that were disrespected. It was her dignity and her family's sense of justice. No one, including the arrogant flight attendant, guessed that her mother was more than a protective parent. She was a force with influence power and an eye for swift, life-altering revenge. The day began like any other at John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the mosaic of travelers. Business people hurried toward gates with briefcases and half-finished coffee cups, while families with small children wrestled with strollers and passports. The endless parade of rolling suitcases drummed a soft percussion on the tiled floors. Though the air held the promise of routine, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Walking hand in hand with her mother, 12-year-old Zara Johnson took in the rush of the airport with wide eyes. She was fascinated by the swirl of humanity, a mix of languages, faces, and styles that converged in this single space. Zara's mother, Dr. Cassandra Johnson, was a woman of effortless poise and commanding presence. Her silver blonde braids were tied neatly in a bun, and her tailored navy blue suit exuded quiet authority. A long-time philanthropist and CEO of a burgeoning multinational conglomerate called Regalcom, Cassandra was used to negotiating multi-million-dollar deals in high-stakes boardrooms. She'd come to New York for a personal project, but couldn't resist checking in on some new developments at her company's aviation technology subsidiary. Although she had never planned to buy an airline outright, she was known for her adaptability and had the means to do so if pushed in the right or wrong direction. This morning they were headed for Flight 222 on Sky Shield Airways, bound for Los Angeles. Zara held a brand-new purple carry-on bag that had been a gift for her 12th birthday. The bag was a point of pride, emblazoned with a shiny silver star on the front, and wheels that lit up whenever she pulled it along. Zara was excited to travel with her mother and hoped to meet her favorite teen author at a book signing event in LA that weekend. Their check-in had gone smoothly, but a nagging sense of tension weighed on the atmosphere. Maybe it was the news flashing across the screens, an uptick in turbulence airline strikes, or even slight flight delays. Cassandra felt the tightness in her chest, a sensation that told her something was off. Yet she brushed it aside and stayed focused on making sure Zara's travel experience remained pleasant. Just past the security checkpoint, the duo encountered their first speed bump. A preoccupied gate agent had them wait off to the side, explaining that the airline was double-checking some passenger loads. Cassandra waited patiently, pulling out her phone to scan the news and keep an eye on her investment portfolios. She scrolled through headlines, Regalcom stock rises, amid merger rumors, CEO Cassandra Johnson named Humanitarian of the Year, and so on. Meanwhile, Zara tried to pass the time, counting how many languages she could hear around her. She caught snippets of Spanish, French, Mandarin, and something that sounded like Portuguese. Each new phrase felt like a tiny gift. If only she thought she could bottle up the variety of the world in a single place. Then a sharp voice pierced the crowd. "Excuse me, that bag is in the way. Move it immediately." Zara turned to see a stern-faced flight attendant glaring straight at her. The woman's name tag read Meredith Jackson. Meredith was in her late 30s, hair slicked back into a severe bun. Her uniform was meticulously pressed, but her body language exuded impatience. She wore a scowl that seemed permanently etched onto her face. Zara hurried to comply, pulling her purple carry-on closer. "I'm sorry," she muttered, stepping aside. Meredith swept past her with a haughty air, muttering something about children with no sense of space. Zara chose to ignore the remark, but something about the flight attendant's voice made her feel uneasy, as if she were an inconvenience just for existing. Once the minor commotion ended, Cassandra took Zara's hand and led her to a nearby bench to wait. With a reassuring smile, she handed Zara a small chocolate bar from her purse. "Don't let that bother you," Cassandra whispered. "Some people just don't know how to be polite." Zara nodded and bit into her treat, but she couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. At last, the gate agent called for boarding. First-class passengers were invited to board first, and Cassandra, thanks to her frequent flyer status and general inclination to travel in comfort, had secured 2 seats in the front cabin. As they approached the door, Zara once again trailed her purple bag, excited that they were finally stepping onto the plane. While they maneuvered through the jet bridge, they noticed Meredith standing at the aircraft door scanning boarding passes. Her face twisted momentarily when she recognized Zara, but she put on a forced smile, more of a grimace, really, when it came time to greet them. "Enjoy your flight," Meredith said, barely looking at Zara. Zara gave her a polite smile, trying to ignore the goosebumps that prickled on her arms. Cassandra noticed the tension, but held her tongue. She was well acquainted with balancing professionalism and empathy. Still, she couldn't ignore the slight hostility in Meredith's demeanor. Once inside the cabin, Zara marveled at the wide seats and extra legroom. Cassandra helped her store her bag in the overhead compartment directly above them. Then she settled Zara into her seat by the window. The hustle and bustle of boarding continued, with more passengers arriving, jostling overhead bins and filling the aisles with carry-ons. Meredith periodically swept down the aisle, instructing passengers with clipped tones. If they needed help, her assistance was swift but harsh, less customer service, more authoritarian chore. Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that Meredith's shift had started on the wrong foot. Zara's backpack didn't look like much, just a lavender-colored roller bag with a stitched unicorn on the front, 1 wheel, slightly squeaky, and a small pink bow tied to the handle. It sat quietly in front of her seat, in row 3, seat A, tucked neatly beneath the tray table as passengers continued boarding. Zara herself, all of 10 years old, was curled into her seat earbuds in trying to distract herself from the low hum of anxiety that always followed her onto planes. She wasn't nervous about flying. She was nervous about people. Her mother, Cassandra, was standing a few rows back, still helping a flight attendant with overhead bin space for another passenger. But Meredith, the lead flight attendant, had already begun her aisle sweep, moving briskly down the row with all the self-importance of a woman who'd worked the skies for too long and lost the warmth somewhere at 35,000 feet. As Meredith reached row 3, her eyes landed on Zara's backpack, which had slightly shifted sideways during boarding. "You can't leave that here," she barked. Zara flinched, tugging her earbuds out. I think it's okay. "My mum said I said you can't leave this here," Meredith repeated, her tone sharper. She didn't wait for a reply. With a force far greater than necessary, she kicked the backpack out from under the seat, sending it sliding 2 rows forward. Zara gasped. A small gasp, sharp, involuntary, followed by immediate tears. The motion had been so aggressive, so sudden, that several nearby passengers looked up. One woman frowned. A man across the aisle muttered, "That wasn't necessary." Zara's lower lip trembled. "That's my bag," she whispered, half rising from her seat. Meredith rolled her eyes. It was blocking the aisle. "FAA rules. Tell your mother to secure it properly next time." But her voice wasn't explaining. It was dismissing, condescending, cold. By now, Cassandra had returned. She immediately noticed her daughter's distressed face and the empty space beneath the seat. "What happened?" she asked, voice calm, but edged with warning. Zara wiped her face. "She kicked my bag, said it was in the way." Cassandra's eyes snapped toward Meredith. "You kicked it?" Meredith didn't flinch. "It was improperly stored. I moved it for safety. That's all." Cassandra calmly stepped into the aisle and retrieved the bag from 2 rows ahead. She checked it. A corner of Zara's tablet case had cracked, and her sketchpad inside had crumpled pages. Zara looked up, eyes wide. "Mom." Cassandra's voice lowered into something razor-thin and deadly calm. "Do not touch my daughter's belongings again, especially not with your foot." Meredith raised an eyebrow. "Mom, if you'd like to file a complaint, you're welcome to contact guest relations after landing." Cassandra gave a small, clipped smile. "Oh, don't worry," she said, stepping past Meredith and gently returning the bag beneath the seat. "I intend to do much more than that." Nearby passengers exchanged glances. Someone began recording. The air in the cabin had changed. No shouting, no drama. Just an unmistakable shift in power, a quiet promise that something had begun. Something that wouldn't end at baggage claim. Because when you kick a little girl's backpack out of first class without knowing who her mother is, you may not realize you've just tripped over a line you can't uncross. Cassandra bit back a more pointed retort, instead pulling Zara to her side. The furious mother turned her attention to the matter at hand, making sure Zara was okay. The child was trembling, clutching her plush cat to her chest. Passengers in nearby seats began murmuring their disapproval toward the flight attendant's behavior. "Are you all right, baby?" Cassandra asked, brushing tears from Zara's cheeks. Zara nodded bravely, swallowing the lump in her throat. Cassandra turned back to Meredith, her voice calm but firm. "You owe my daughter an apology." Meredith folded her arms. "I'm just enforcing airline policy. No items in the aisle means no items in the aisle." Cassandra's nostrils flared, but she took a deep breath and forced herself to remain composed. She'd learned long ago that her every reaction was scrutinized. Being a successful black businesswoman in a predominantly white industry, she knew the importance of maintaining decorum. "It is not airline policy to kick a child's property," Cassandra said, her tone clipped. "If there was a safety concern, you could have politely asked her to move it." "That's no justification for physical aggression." Meredith gave a tight smile. "I'll see if the captain wants to weigh in. But as of now, if you're dissatisfied with our service, I can have you removed from the flight." A ripple of shock spread among the onlookers. One middle-aged woman in seat 2B leaned across the aisle. "She's just a kid. You didn't have to do that," the woman muttered under her breath to Meredith. Cassandra's measured composure began to slip. She was already forming mental calculations about the cost of scheduling a charter if they got kicked off this flight. A phone call was all it would take, but she also wanted to teach this flight attendant a lesson, one that would resonate far more than a heated argument in first class. She felt her phone vibrate. A message from her personal assistant popped up on the lock screen. Merger negotiations with OmniSky could finalize today. "They want a call." Her heart quickened. OmniSky was one of the fastest-growing aviation conglomerates in the market. If the negotiations went well, Cassandra's company might acquire a significant stake enough to have serious leverage in the airline industry. She glanced up, noticing Meredith's stare. The flight attendant's expression seemed to say, "I dare you to fight me on this." Cassandra inhaled deeply. "We'll see about that," she said under her breath, retrieving her phone and stepping into the aisle, mindful to keep Zara close. Word travels fast in an airplane cabin. By the time Cassandra discreetly exited the aircraft for a phone call, Nearly everyone in first class, and some in economy, had heard about the flight attendant who kicked a black girl's bag. Soft chatter swelled, and the uneasy hush that followed left an electric tension in the air. Zara sat quietly, flipping through her notebook in an attempt to calm down. Her heart still pounded from the shock. She felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. The woman from seat 2B leaned over. "Hey there, sweetie," she said kindly. "My name's Tracy." "You doing okay?" Zara nodded, trying to hold back tears. "Yeah. Thanks. Your mum seems like a strong woman," Tracy said, offering a small smile. "Hang in there. Something tells me you're going to be just fine." Zara smiled back, appreciating the friendly gesture. For a moment, she wondered what her mother was doing outside. Maybe it was a phone call about the charity project, or maybe it was about the expansions she'd heard her mother discussing at home. Zara knew her mum was influential, but she never quite understood the full extent of it, only that powerful people listened when Cassandra spoke. Meanwhile, Meredith stood near the galley chewing her lip, possibly contemplating if she'd gone too far. She glanced toward the cockpit, where the pilot and co-pilot were busy presumably looking over flight routes and maintenance checks. A pang of guilt seemed to flicker across her features, but she quickly pushed it aside, stiffening her posture. A few minutes later, Cassandra re-entered the cabin with a measured stride. She calmly took her seat next to Zara. In her eyes there was a new glint of resolve. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Lawrence speaking. We're finishing up a few last-minute safety checks. We should be ready for takeoff in about 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience." The words were standard, but the atmosphere was anything but. Cassandra reached for Zara's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Everything will be okay," she whispered. Meredith continued her rounds, offering perfunctory smiles to other passengers and avoiding Cassandra's gaze. Zara noticed a tall, silver-haired passenger in the front row, eyeing Meredith with open disapproval. He stood and approached them quietly. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Cassandra politely. "I saw what happened earlier. I just wanted you to know that if you need me as a witness, I'll gladly vouch for your daughter." He handed her a simple, white business card. His name was Charles Hathaway, a partner at a major law firm in Manhattan. Cassandra nodded in gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Hathaway. I appreciate your support. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Charles smiled sympathetically. "I hope so too. Safe travels." Returning to her seat, Cassandra opened her phone to an email from her personal assistant, Sienna subject Omnisky negotiations message they want to finalize. They're willing to talk big numbers, possibly a controlling stake, Cassandra. This could be huge. Call me ASAP. Cassandra's mind raced. Purchasing an airline outright was not originally on her agenda, but if Omnisky was offering a controlling stake, she could effectively become a major shareholder in Sky Shield Airways, the very airline she was on right now. This changed everything. Rage burned beneath her calm exterior as she remembered the image of Meredith's foot colliding with Zara's bag. Something in her mind clicked. For years, Cassandra's philanthropic and business efforts had gone into uplifting marginalized communities and ensuring equal opportunities. She believed in growth, not vengeance, but sometimes the most effective lessons were taught with decisive action. Perhaps this was fate's way of nudging her toward a bigger move. As they waited for the final go-ahead, Cassandra allowed her thoughts to wander. She remembered being Zara's age, traveling with her own mother from Atlanta to visit relatives in California. They'd been bumped from a flight at the last minute, despite having valid tickets. Her mother had had to argue to get them back on board. Cassandra recalled the shame and anger she felt, how she told herself that if she ever got into a position of influence, she'd change how people of color were treated. Years later, she was the CEO of a multinational conglomerate, but old scars had a way of resurfacing. Witnessing Meredith's behavior toward Zara felt like stepping back into that memory. Instead of passively accepting injustice, Cassandra now held the power to make swift, meaningful change. A flight attendant's voice this time, a different woman, echoed through the first-class cabin. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage?" Cassandra looked up, noticing the attendant's polite, if slightly nervous, smile. She was younger than Meredith, likely new to the job. Cassandra declined with a polite wave. Her mind was too preoccupied to enjoy a drink right now. Zara perked up a bit. "May I have some orange juice, please?" The flight attendant nodded and returned with a small cup. Zara sipped it slowly. The sweet tang settled her nerves. The plane pushed back from the gate, but then halted. Over the intercom, Captain Lawrence informed them of a taxiing delay due to congestion on the runway. "Should be no more than 15 or 20 minutes, he assured. Cassandra felt her phone vibrate again, a text from Sienna. "Call me. Now." She realized that if they were about to take off, she might not have another chance to finalize the negotiations in flight. The window was closing fast. "Zara, stay here," Cassandra said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I need to make a quick call before they close the cabin doors." Zara nodded, hugging her plush cat. She watched her mother disappear into the galley area. Through the gaps in the seats, Zara glimpsed Meredith, leaning against a counter, looking agitated. Cassandra's voice was low, but her posture carried authority. Passengers threw inquisitive glances, but no one dared intrude. The plane's cabin was buzzing with the quiet tension of pre-departure. Passengers were settling into their seats, overhead bins were slamming shut, and the final boarding announcements echoed through the cabin. But in seat 3A, Cassandra Pierce sat still as a statue, her phone pressed to her ear, her brow furrowed in deep focus. Zara sat beside her, her backpack finally secured under the seat in front of her after everything. She kept glancing sideways at her mother, unsure of what was happening, but sensing something monumental was unfolding. "Cassandra," a voice said on the line. "We're almost out of time. Legal has cleared the paperwork, but the window's closing. If we want this, we need your word now." Cassandra's eyes flicked to her Rolex. 10 minutes until takeoff. 10 minutes until the door closed, and she would be unreachable for the next 5 hours. Her voice was calm, measured, but beneath the surface there was fire. "I want full control. Voting rights. Final say on board, restructuring," she said. "This isn't just a hostile acquisition. It's personal now." There was a pause on the other end. "You'll get it," the advisor confirmed. "Once you say yes, Sky Shield Airways is yours." Cassandra looked out the window for a breath, her reflection faint in the glass. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same airline that had humiliated her daughter 10 minutes ago would belong to her by the time they touched down. She turned slightly to look at Zara, who was hugging her knees to her chest, earbuds in, but not playing anything. The girl's eyes met her mother's, searching, silently asking, "Are we okay? Am I safe now?" Cassandra reached over and squeezed her hand. Then she turned back and spoke with surgical precision. "Make the call. Execute the deal. Wire the full sum. I want confirmation before wheels up." "Understood," the voice replied. "Congratulations, Cassandra. You just bought an airline." She ended the call and immediately switched her phone to airplane mode as the flight attendant walked down the aisle, calling out final instructions. Zara looked at her confused. Was that work stuff? Cassandra gave a small, enigmatic smile. Something like that. But deep down, it wasn't about business anymore. This was about legacy, about teaching her daughter something. The world too often failed to show young black girls that they didn't have to accept disrespect, not even from the powerful. That money wasn't just for comfort, it was for leverage. That sometimes the best way to fight back wasn't with raised voices, but with signed contracts and irrevocable ownership. As the cabin doors sealed shut and the plane taxied toward the runway, Meredith, the flight attendant, passed by without meeting Cassandra's eyes. She had no idea the woman she had disrespected would soon have access to her employment file, her manager's inbox, and the power to change her fate. And Cassandra. She leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and exhaled for the first time all day. The storm was over. The reckoning had just begun. Heart racing, Cassandra took a seat in the jump seat near the cockpit for a moment, phone in hand. As the flight attendant in the galley tapped her foot impatiently, Cassandra opened her email, scanning the contract swiftly. It was all the due diligence she had done for weeks, culminating in these final lines. She pressed her digital signature onto the document Cassandra M. Johnson. Within seconds, she received a confirmation from Sienna Contract finalized. We have majority. Cassandra's eyes closed in relief. The entire deal had gone through in the span of a few frantic minutes. This was no small feat. Acquiring a controlling interest in an airline was a multi-million-dollar, possibly a multi-billion-dollar maneuver. But that was the world Cassandra lived in. She returned to her seat next to Zara, buckled up, and gave her daughter a reassuring smile. "Everything is going to be fine," Cassandra whispered. Zara nodded, though she was still shaken. Down the aisle, Meredith glared at them. Little did she know that the woman in seat 2A was now effectively one of the most powerful figures at Sky Shield Airways. Finally, the plane taxied onto the runway and lifted into the skies above New York City. The seatbelt sign blinked reassuringly as the aircraft climbed past the skyline. Zara glanced out of the window, enthralled by the miniature buildings below. Cassandra stared straight ahead, formulating her next steps. At cruising altitude, the flight attendants began their in-flight service. Meredith approached carrying a tray of drinks. She put down a glass of sparkling water in front of Cassandra, without a word. Then she turned to Zara, who politely requested a soda. Meredith sighed, her lips thinning into a line, and placed the can and plastic cup in front of Zara with a bit more force than necessary. Cassandra thanked her quietly, but Meredith simply huffed and moved on. The tension between them hadn't diminished. It had only become more potent. Midway through the flight, turbulence shook the aircraft, causing drinks to rattle. Passengers tightened their seatbelts, bracing themselves. Zara gripped Cassandra's hand, her eyes wide. She'd flown before, but this was rougher than usual. Cassandra stroked Zara's arm, whispering reassuring words. Meredith tried to maintain her balance while she continued distributing snacks. Her mask of composure slipped every time the plane jostled. At one particularly strong jolt, Meredith spilled a handful of crackers onto the floor near seat 2B. Tracy, the friendly passenger from earlier, politely said she'd clean it up herself. Meredith mumbled a thank you that barely sounded grateful. The plane had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign had been turned off, and the cabin had settled into a low hum of conversation and in-flight routines. But tension still hung in the air around row 3, like static before a thunderstorm. Meredith, the senior flight attendant who had kicked Zara's backpack without hesitation, was now walking down the aisle with a tight smile stretched across her face. She had mostly avoided eye contact with Cassandra and Zara since takeoff, but now, compelled by duty or guilt, she stopped beside them with a forced cheeriness. "Would either of you like a beverage?" she asked stiffly, her eyes darting toward Zara, but avoiding Cassandra altogether. Zara looked down, avoiding the question. Cassandra slowly turned to face Meredith, her tone polite but firm. "I'm fine, thank you. But I would appreciate a word. In private." Meredith's professional mask faltered for a split second, then she forced a thin smile. "Of course. We can step toward the galley in the back." Cassandra nodded. "Lead the way." As Cassandra stood, the cabin seemed to tilt just slightly, not because of turbulence, but because something had shifted. Passengers nearby watched curiously as the elegantly dressed woman in heels and silk rose from her seat like royalty and followed the flight attendant, who had just an hour earlier humiliated her daughter. Inside the rear galley, away from passenger ears, Meredith folded her arms. "Look, if this is about earlier, I told the purser I'd file an incident report. Maybe you're just sensitive about Cassandra," held up one hand. "No," she said, cool and commanding. "You don't speak yet. You listen." Meredith blinked, taken aback by the shift in tone. "I've stayed quiet until now because I wanted to handle this with the grace and patience my daughter deserves to witness. But since you seem unclear on the gravity of what's happened, allow me to clarify." She took a small card from her purse and handed it over. Meredith looked down, confused. It wasn't a business card. It was a shareholder identification pass, gilded and embossed, issued by Sky Shield Airways Holdings Group. "I'm the new majority shareholder," Cassandra said calmly. "As of 1 hour ago, I own controlling interest in this airline." Meredith froze. The words hit harder than any reprimand. Her mouth opened slightly. "You what?" Cassandra's voice remained even. "The transaction closed just before wheels up. You might want to double-check with your captain, or your union rep, or HR." Meredith's face turned pale. "This has to be some kind of joke." "It's not," Cassandra said. "And believe me, if I were here to play games, you'd already be off this flight." There was a pause, long and cold. "I'm not here for revenge," Cassandra continued, "but I do believe in accountability. You kicked my daughter's bag. You didn't speak to her. You didn't speak to me. You decided she didn't belong in your idea of first class. You made assumptions and you acted on them." Meredith tried to interject. "That wasn't, it was Cassandra," cut in. "And now I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next." A new voice broke the silence. The flight purser, an older man with years of experience written into the lines of his face, had entered the galley. "I just received word from the captain," he said, addressing Meredith carefully. He confirmed it. A corporate update came through mid-flight. Cassandra Pierce now holds 51% of Sky Shield's private stock. He turned to Cassandra. "Ma'am, is there anything you'd like to request?" Cassandra looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like to return to my seat, and I'd like my daughter to fly in peace." Then she looked back at Meredith. "Your record will be reviewed. Your actions today, recorded, reported, and witnessed, will be evaluated. And whatever consequences come, will be deserved." Meredith nodded numbly. She suddenly seemed smaller, not just humbled, but rattled by the weight of her own behavior. Cassandra gave her one last glance, a look not of cruelty, but of unshakable clarity. Then she turned and walked back down the aisle heels, clicking softly, head held high. As she sat beside Zara again, her daughter looked at her with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" Mum Cassandra smiled, smoothing Zara's curls gently. "I'm perfect, sweetheart." And for the first time that day, Zara smiled too, knowing she wasn't just protected. She was seen. Flight 202 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport a few hours later, rolling across the tarmac as the setting sun stained the sky pink and orange. When the seatbelt sign turned off, there was the usual scramble of passengers standing to retrieve overhead luggage. Cassandra remained seated, instructing Zara to wait as well. She wanted to avoid the crowd and have a clear path to speak with the purser or the highest-ranking flight official. Tracy smiled and waved goodbye to Zara as she walked down the aisle. "Take care, sweetie, and I hope you get a real apology someday," she said, throwing a pointed look toward Meredith. Meredith busied herself, handing items back to passengers, ignoring the pointed remarks. Once the majority of travelers had disembarked, Cassandra stood taking Zara's hand. She approached Eric, who introduced her to the purser, Anita Rhodes, a composed woman in her 50s with a warm demeanor. "Ms. Johnson." Anita greeted. "Eric said you wanted to speak with me." Cassandra nodded. "Yes, if you wouldn't mind. And please call me Cassandra. This is my daughter Zara." Anita smiled at Zara. "It's nice to meet you." "It would be better under different circumstances," Cassandra said. She glanced behind Anita and spotted Meredith gathering her belongings, clearly impatient to leave. "I'd like Miss Jackson to be present for this conversation too." Anita looked puzzled, but obliged. "Meredith, could you join us for a moment?" Meredith stiffened, but she couldn't refuse in front of her superior. "Yes, Miss Rhodes?" she asked, stepping forward. Cassandra sighed gently, placing a hand on Zara's shoulder. "My daughter experienced something very unacceptable today. I believe you know what I'm referring to, Ms. Jackson." Meredith's eyes darted between Anita and Cassandra. "If it's about the aisle incident, I was enforcing safety procedures," she said in a clipped tone. Anita's eyes darkened. "I'm sorry, can you clarify what happened?" Cassandra explained briefly, her voice calm but firm. "Kicking my daughter's bag is not enforcement of safety procedures. It was aggressive, inappropriate, and traumatizing for my child. I was prepared to address this formally through your HR channels until something else came up." Meredith shifted uncomfortably. Zara squeezed her mother's hand, finding some measure of bravery in this confrontation. Cassandra continued. "I'd like you both to know that as of a few hours ago, I became the majority stakeholder in Sky Shield Airways." There it was, the bombshell she'd been waiting to drop. Anita's jaw dropped slightly. Meredith's face went ashen. You own the airline," Meredith stammered. Cassandra gave a thin smile. "I own a controlling stake, which means I'm effectively your boss's boss's boss. By the time Flight 218 taxied to the gate at LAX, word had already moved faster than the aircraft. While most passengers remained unaware of the corporate shift that had occurred, mid-air those in the know pilots, senior crew and key members of airline management had already received encrypted internal bulletins. Cassandra Pierce now officially held controlling interest in Sky Shield Airways. And for Meredith, the senior flight attendant, whose careless kick had triggered this entire chain of events, the consequences were about to arrive swiftly and unmistakably. Inside the crew debriefing room, Meredith sat at a long table, trying to keep her expression composed. But the sheen of sweat along her brow and the way her fingers tapped relentlessly against her coffee cup betrayed the truth she was unraveling. Across from her sat Derek Valen, a Sky Shield regional HR director who had flown in overnight from San Francisco for this very purpose. Next to him was Annabelle Chong, Director of Cabin Operations, her face unreadable behind rimless glasses. Meredith Derrick began flipping open a thin folder. "We've reviewed your service record. 10 years with the airline, mostly clean. A few complaints, nothing serious until now." Meredith nodded stiffly. Annabelle chimed in. "But what happened yesterday wasn't just a service mistake. It was a public incident involving a minor, a customer of color, and now your new majority stakeholder." Meredith looked up sharply. "I didn't know who she was." "You didn't have to," Derek replied calmly. "That's the point." He leaned forward, his tone firm but not cruel. "You treated her daughter with dismissiveness, escalated the situation with physical contact, and made no attempt to de-escalate or apologize. And then, when approached by Miss Pierce herself, you doubled down." Meredith opened her mouth. "I didn't mean to. This isn't about intentions," Annabelle cut in. "It's about actions, and impact, and image. You represent us not just at 35,000 feet, but on the record every day." She pulled out a printed screenshot from a Twitter post. It showed a blurred image of Meredith clearly mid-confrontation, with the caption, "Flight attendant kicks black girl's bag in first class. Her mum ends up buying the airline." Sky Shield scandal. It had over 9 million views. "This is what's going viral," Annabelle said coldly. "Not your training certificates. Not your years of service." Back at the arrivals lounge, Cassandra and Zara were greeted by a personal concierge from the airline, though this time no one dared make assumptions. Every step Cassandra took now carried the quiet gravity of someone who owned the room. Zara clung to her mother's hand as they walked toward the baggage carousel. "Is she going to get fired?" the girl asked softly. Cassandra glanced down at her, then ahead. "That's up to HR, but she'll be held accountable." Zara thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Meanwhile, back in the crew room, Meredith was asked to sign a temporary suspension agreement while the formal disciplinary process was completed. "We will be forwarding your conduct report to the Internal Review Board," Derek explained. "You're suspended from all active flight duties, effective immediately. You are not permitted to wear the uniform access secure crew areas or interact with passengers until a full resolution is determined." And be aware, Annabelle added, Mrs. Pierce's legal counsel has the right to request all internal correspondence and logs related to this flight, so I'd advise you not to delete anything. Meredith swallowed hard. Then, as if the air itself had shifted, the door behind them opened, and Cassandra Pierce stepped into the room. Meredith's eyes widened. Ms. Pierce-Derrick began standing quickly. "We weren't expecting you." Cassandra raised a hand. "I won't be long." She stepped forward, her voice measured. "I came here to say one thing, not as a mother or a shareholder, but as a woman who refuses to be silent." She looked directly at Meredith. "What you did to my daughter was more than a careless act. It was a message you don't belong here. And what I want you to understand is that message ends with me." Meredith lowered her gaze. "I don't need to see you punished to feel powerful," Cassandra added. "I need to see you learn. I need to see this airline, my airline now, become a place where no girl ever has to feel that again." She looked at Derek and Annabelle. "I'll let your process run its course, but I'll be watching closely." And with that, she turned and walked out, head-high heels, clicking softly on the tile floor. Silence followed her. Meredith sat frozen in her chair. For the first time, the consequences felt real. By the morning after Flight 218 landed in Los Angeles, the incident had already outgrown the cabin aisle where it began. The video, a 15-second clip, showing flight attendant Meredith Langford aggressively kicking a young black girl's backpack down the aisle, had been viewed over 5 million times overnight. The footage captured not only the motion of the kick, but the small, startled gasp from Zara, and the cold indifference on Meredith's face as she turned away. And now it was everywhere. Cable news shows led with it. This morning, airline outrage did a flight attendant cross the line, one network banner read, while another declared black girl's bag kicked in first class. Her mom now owns the airline. Talk show hosts dissected every frame. Morning anchors interviewed aviation experts and civil rights advocates. Even late-night comedians couldn't resist commenting, though most, in a rare moment of unity, struck a more serious tone. On Twitter, the hashtags were trending globally. Zara's bag. Fly with dignity. Cassandra Pierce effect. One viral tweet read, "She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She bought the company. That's power." That was Zara's mom. Another from a prominent civil rights attorney stated, "What happened to that child is exactly why representation matters in boardrooms." Cassandra Pierce didn't just clap back, she changed the entire narrative. Even celebrities chimed in. A-list actresses, best-selling authors, and prominent CEOs reshared the video and praised Cassandra's poised response. One post by a Grammy-winning artist read, "Imagine being so disrespectful to a kid that her mum buys your employer. God, I love black women." Meanwhile, Sky Shield Airways' PR team was in crisis mode. Inside their Manhattan headquarters, a dozen executives sat bleary-eyed in a conference room, hunched over laptops and phones. The damage was undeniable. "We've issued 3 statements already," the communications VP muttered. "None of them are sticking." The CMO replied, "Because the internet isn't looking for a statement. They're looking for accountability." Legal counsel interjected. "And because Cassandra Pierce now holds controlling interest, we can't move a finger without her approval." Silence. On screen, a real-time sentiment tracker showed public trust in Sky Shield had dropped 27% in 24 hours. Cassandra Pierce, however, had not spoken publicly yet. She declined all interview requests, instructed her legal and communications teams to hold back, and told Zara not to read the comments. "We're not reacting," she said. "We're leading." In private, she drafted a strategy, not to simply issue another corporate apology, but to launch a broader initiative, one that would reshape how Sky Shield trained, hired, promoted, and held its people accountable. She wasn't just going to fix the image. She was going to fix the culture. Back at Zara's school, things were different too. Students were whispering in the hallway. Some had seen the video. A few teachers gave her quiet nods of support. And in the lunchroom, one of the mean girls who used to tease her about her quietness came over and awkwardly offered her a cookie. Zara didn't fully understand why the world suddenly seemed to care. But when her mum tucked her into bed that night, she whispered, "Are people mad at Meredith?" Her mother responded gently, "They're not just mad, sweetie. They're awake now." Across the country, other flight attendants, especially women of color, began sharing their own stories online. Stories of disrespect, of passengers being singled out of assumptions made because of hair, skin, or name. One post read, "Zara's bag was the breaking point." The story isn't new, but this time someone had the power to fight back on a bigger scale. And that more than anything was the true frenzy. Not just that something wrong had happened, but that for once the ending belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to win. 2 days later, Cassandra found herself in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Sky Shield Airways corporate headquarters. A line of executives sat at a long table, some wide-eyed with curiosity, others with apprehension. They were meeting their new boss and had no idea what to expect. Cassandra stood at the head of the table, scanning the room with a calm, incisive gaze. "I'll keep this brief," she began. "I've reviewed the financial reports, employee training manuals, and customer feedback from the past year. Sky Shield has potential, but it's underperforming, especially in terms of customer satisfaction and employee relations." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We're going to change that. Effective immediately, I'm instituting a new training program focused on empathy and cultural sensitivity. Flight attendants and all customer-facing staff will be required to complete it." An executive raised his hand tentatively. "Dr. Johnson about the incident on Flight 202. Cassandra cut him off gently. "That is already under investigation by HR. I expect a thorough report by the end of the week. But let me make something clear. No passenger, regardless of background, should ever feel unsafe or disrespected on our flights. Is that understood?" A chorus of nods filled the room. Cassandra offered a small smile. "Thank you. Let's make SkyShield Airways an industry leader in both service and ethics. The world is watching." 3 weeks had passed since Flight 218 touched down at LAX, 3 weeks since a flight attendant kicked a young black girl's backpack and unwittingly sparked a corporate power shift that would ripple far beyond one cabin crew interaction. And now the final chapter was beginning to write itself. Meredith Langford stood in front of her apartment window in Long Beach, staring out at the ocean that had once soothed her nerves after long flight rotations. But this time it offered no calm. Her email inbox had been eerily silent. No shift notifications, no new schedules, and no reply from the union rep she'd called 4 times this week. She glanced again at the last message she had received from SkyShield Airways HR. 2 lines that had redefined her career. After extensive review, your employment with SkyShield Airways has been terminated effective immediately. Your access to crew systems and travel privileges has been revoked. That was it. No phone call, no meeting, no second chance. Meredith was no longer a flight attendant. She was no longer anything. Elsewhere, the decision was being discussed not behind closed doors, but in public headlines and HR compliance briefings. Cassandra Pierce had made it clear from the beginning this wasn't about punishment, it was about precedent. If SkyShield was going to be reborn under her leadership, it had to start from the bottom up. Not just new marketing campaigns, not just bias training modules, but actual accountability. The company issued a formal press release following internal investigation into an incident involving a minor passenger and a member of our flight crew. SkyShield Airways has taken decisive disciplinary action. Our commitment to respectful, inclusive and dignified travel is not just branding, it's policy. For the public, it was a win. For flight crews, a wake-up call. And for Meredith, a reckoning. She had applied to 3 other airlines within days of her suspension. All 3 had replied with the same language, cut-and-paste legal speak she could now recite by heart. "We regret to inform you that your application has been declined. At this time, we are unable to move forward due to internal considerations and brand reputation alignment." It didn't take a genius to decode it. The industry had spoken. Her name had become a cautionary tale. Back in LA, Cassandra and Zara had moved on quietly. Cassandra returned to her boardrooms and strategy calls, while Zara returned to school, her backpack no longer a symbol of confrontation, but of protection. Yet something had changed between them. Zara walked a little taller now, not because her mum had bought an airline, but because she had seen what dignity looked like under pressure. She had watched her mother not shout, but stand, not demand revenge, but deliver reform. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Meredith sat in a cafe, scrolling through a travel blog on her phone. A new SkyShield campaign was trending. It featured a smiling young black girl seated in first class reading a book. The tagline read, "Where every passenger belongs." Meredith's face twisted not with anger, but with a hollow kind of defeat. Her eyes lingered on the girl's smile. And that was when she finally understood. It hadn't just been about the bag, or the girl, or even the mother. It had been about the message she had sent, and the one the world sent back. Hard karma had struck, and it had struck exactly where it was deserved. In the following months, Cassandra made sweeping changes at SkyShield, from renovating airport lounges to updating employee benefits. She instituted scholarships for aspiring flight attendants from underrepresented communities, ensuring that future staff would be more diverse, empathetic, and better trained. Zara watched her mother from the sidelines, proud and fascinated. She saw how Cassandra took something negative, a moment of cruelty, and turned it into a catalyst for broad, positive change. Interviews with major media outlets highlighted Cassandra's vision. She insisted that the story not revolve around personal vengeance, but around the need for an industry-wide shift in how airlines treat passengers, especially children, and those from marginalized groups. Regalcom's stock soared as investors recognized the synergy between Cassandra's leadership style and SkyShield's new direction. OmniSky's partnership remained strong, seeing profits rise from the positive publicity and increased bookings from passengers who admired the airline's sudden pivot toward better customer service. One day, as they prepared for another business trip, Cassandra and Zara strolled through LAX, this time wearing matching smiles rather than tension. Zara still had her purple carry-on bag, with the silver star lovingly patched up with a new zipper and handle. The wheels still lit up, though faintly. A group of flight attendants from SkyShield walked by, greeting Cassandra respectfully. They didn't just see her as the boss, they saw her as someone who genuinely cared about employees and passengers alike. Zara noticed a young flight attendant beaming at them. She had bright eyes and introduced herself as Amelia. "We've undergone the new training program you initiated," Amelia said. "It's really changed how we approach our job." "Thank you." Cassandra nodded, a sense of fulfillment warming her chest. "Thank you for being part of that change," she replied. As they boarded their flight, Zara's carry-on rolled behind her without incident. No one kicked it. No one scolded her. Instead, a polite attendant offered to stow it carefully in the overhead bin. Zara grinned up at her mother, who smiled back in relief and pride. Sometimes, a single moment can turn a life upside down or right side up. For Zara, what began as a traumatic experience became a watershed moment of empowerment. For Cassandra, her child's distress fueled a resolve to reshape the very industry where that injustice took place. When the dust settled, a new airline culture rose from the ashes of one flight attendant's cruel act. Now it's your turn to take action by sharing this story's message. If you believe in equality, respect, and the power of standing up for what's right, don't just let this narrative end here. Like this video to spread awareness, share it with friends who need a reminder of how one voice can spark change, and subscribe to this channel to stay connected with more stories that reveal the impact a single decision can have on the world. Together we can make every flight and every journey one of dignity and hope.